lockdown, episode 7 already. It's pretty crazy. And we move from the athletes in front of the lens to the people behind the lens, and two of South Africa's preeminent photographers. It is the world's nicest man, Alan van Gysen, and the Hawkman, Ian Thurtell. How are you doing, gentlemen?
Yes. Kai, what's happening?
Yeah, Kai, thanks for having us.
Yeah, well, I thought it was about time we got some of the guys behind the scenes on the show. We've had a lot of athletes. Also, Ian's been messaging me thick to do one of these. So Hawkman and Captain Kai ride again. And I mean, if you guys have seen some of the previous episodes, we've had Geordie, Travis. I've got the girls launching this evening with Rosie and Sophie and Heather. And literally, the opening point of all of it is how have you been dealing with lockdown, Ian?
Well, yeah, for me, it's been a bit different because, I mean, as Kai, you'd know that the local South African Curious series would have kicked off in April with 2 events and then straight into May. So those have completely fallen away. And yeah, I mean, same as you, we prepare for those months, get everything ready, and same as the whole world, it just fell away. And suddenly you have this big void of, oh, what do I do? And yeah, so it's been interesting, and I've just tried to keep busy doing some DIY around the house. I've actually made another housing for myself for my phone, and yeah, just trying to keep busy. And geez, hope this thing can end soon so we can all get back in the water.
Alan, how are things down in the deep south of Cape Town?
That's cool. I'm just keeping an eye out for the officials and the O's that are surfing the lineup. No, it's been good. Up till last week, it was quite slow for me work-wise. Last month was pretty much zero work, and I was, feeling a little bit of, I wouldn't say pressure, but certainly mounting financial pressure. And as you guys know, I'm a pretty active, busy guy. I'm never not doing something. So used that time well, though, to train at home. I had a good routine going with some core strength and cardio stuff. And as I'm sitting here right now, my daughter's next to me drawing her music notes out. So I'm teaching music with the kids and helping my wife do schooling. And yeah, I mean, with 3 kids, there's lots to do. And yeah, then at the end of last month, when the lockdown was starting to turn over, I actually thought, no, I've got to try and get some other local work while I can. And approached some of the publications I work for and got a photojournalist permit. And not really in the line of surfing, of course, but being able to get out and about and actually really show what's happening out in the Cape area as far as I'm able to drive, just to tell stories of people in the communities. It's been really cool to actually get a proper bit of perspective on what's actually really happening out there and how we can actually help some others.
Well, let's talk about that, because obviously a big focus, especially on Cape Town surfers in the media, has been surfers breaking the lockdown. We saw images from Long Beach, Tableview, Muidenberg. And it seems like, I mean, while there have been a lot of calls from surf groups up the coasts, from North Coast to everywhere else, like we talk about the J Bay locals, we talk about some of the other big areas like Durban, the waves were cooking, and those communities have chosen to honor the lockdown and not go out. Whereas we've seen in Cape Town, we've seen a lot of surfers hitting the lineup. But it was interesting to see some of your posts sort of behind the lines on the other side, in the townships and in the informal settlements. Also seeing some of the other photographers involved in surfing who do sort of the news stuff. And Brenton Geach posting a very poignant post the other day on Facebook with a little 5-year-old girl queuing for food in Lavender Hill. And I mean, if you've been out, you've seen the stuff, Alan. I don't think a lot of people actually understand what's the big problem here in South Africa. It's not being able to not surf. It's that there are people actually starving.
100%. I mean, look, I think all of us have heard the saying that, we are not in the same boat, but we are in the same storm. And let's be honest, it's very real for everybody at different levels. And South Africa, we are so diverse and we are so different. And everybody's feeling this in different ways. And I think we must never lose sight of the fact that this is a real mental health issue you know, and if that means you can run out of your settlement, your informal settlement, or a place to go play soccer with your mates, or go for a walk on the mountain, or if you live near the coast, you go for a surf. Some people legitimately need something to help them with their mental health. I think that's something that government and all of us need to seriously address in the next couple of weeks if this is going to continue. I think it's really starting to hurt some people. But I also do think, as a perspective for us surfers, is surfing has always been something that can also be very selfish. And I think that is also coming to light. And for sure, it's a privilege. For me, myself, I'm deciding not to surf, more for the fact that I want to focus my energies on my work and also shedding light on what's really happening up there. So I am spending a lot of time in Hamburg, in Hart Bay. I'm spending time up in Strandfontein at the 9 Miles Project with Nigel Saville and the groups. They're doing incredible work there. I'm going to be shortly spending some more time with Frank Solomon, the Sentinel Ocean, and yeah, man, just getting some time in, you know, even just locally, Ocean View, Masiphumelele. There's just so much that needs doing, and I think just spreading the word of what's actually happening. It's really, really difficult to see how little is kind of coming down to these communities from government, unfortunately. Maybe it will come soon, I do hope, but at the moment, it's all coming from just people that really care about those around them, you know, caring for your neighbors. So yeah, so the next couple of weeks, I hope people see some sort of turnaround there. But yeah, there are people that legitimately, as you said, are starving. They're just trying to get by. Not even another crazy thing that I've been looking at the last few weeks is pets. You know, you look at some of these animals in the communities too. They also need to be fed, and there's just so much need at the moment.
What's interesting, you bring that one up, because I'm in wilderness for lockdown, and being told that the animal shelter in George has got over 5,000 dogs. And they literally are going to have to just start putting them down because they can't actually afford the number of dogs in that small area. And more importantly is that people are just deserting their pets, because when you can't feed yourself, you know, what happens to the pet?
Yeah, I looked just before lockdown here in our community. I'm not sure if it was the same in Hart Bay, Ian, but the Tears group in near to kind of Masiphumelele, they actually asked, please, we know this is coming. Anybody who can take a dog, please take a dog. And there were about 200 people that took about 200 dogs, and they found a home for almost every single one. So it was such a relief to hear that. Seeing Nick Bothma's posts from the animal work shelters and veterinarians in Kailicha, we've got a big problem there also with dogs. There's also a lot of disease there and the lack of, you know, food for them. So yeah, you're right. It's a real big thing. I mean, I don't know if people are able to, I don't know if there would be an allowance for people to be able to try and get animals at this time, or just to kind of provisionally look after them. But man, it's very upsetting. It's very hard to hear.
Now, Ian, obviously we talk about work and losing work. I mean, for myself, like you said, we're about to go into the busy time, the busy 4 months for the South African surf industry competitively. All the QSs, all the pro juniors, and, you know, finishing up with the two jewels, obviously Belito and Jaiba, which are not going to happen. We're looking at international travel. Foreseeably, I don't see it really happening much before November, December, and then there's going to be really sort of hardcore restrictions on that. As a person who primarily makes their money off of taking surf photos, what do you do? What are your plans?
Well, the funny thing is, Alan and I actually discussed this quite early on. As the lockdown started happening, Alan was like, "Oh, the beaches are closed, but you know they can't stop us making money because we are in the surf. So technically, that's our job." And then it all happened where, you know, everything's closed down, and suddenly you realize, well, if they can't open the beaches, I can't make a living. And that's why Alan has cleverly gone around and done something else on the side. But I mean, if this thing carries on, I actually can't understand or see how it's, I mean, it has to come out. And the cool thing is that a lot of the surfers that I shoot actually have bought images from me recently to keep their profile going on Instagram, which is important for them as it is important for me. So that's a cool thing, and I'm glad the surfers are actually understanding the value of that. Where, I mean, the social media game right now is, or has been for a while, is full on, like, you've got to keep pumping out media, and if you don't, you're behind. So it's maybe a good thing that all these young groms and surfers alike are starting to understand, well, hang on, these guys actually have shot us for a long time, and they've got the stock that I need, and it's a give and take. So yeah, it's a really cool thing, but I mean, obviously that can't last forever. So yeah, I mean, basically let's just hope to get in the water, and maybe the trend that we set with riders understanding that we do a job for them and we look after them in some way, that can be reciprocated afterwards and carry on in that same way.
Now, Alan, I mean, you spend a large portion of the year traveling. I would say you're at the pinnacle of surf photography in that you work with the biggest online publications and Stab and those guys. You're doing trips with the biggest surfers in the world to pretty exotic locations. It's an interesting conundrum because literally that carpet has been swept away from us. There's no option really. So we're going to, even when things kind of go back to normality, look at local, because you're not going to be able to cross borders for quite a while. And you're going to be forced to work with local surfers because those internationals are not going to be allowed to get here.
For sure. No, you bring up a great point. I've actually been quite excited for the fact that we are all, no matter where we live in the world, I think we're all going to be focusing on local. Talking to Dylan Graves and those guys, they're focusing on all their weird waves things only local, which is awesome. That's great for them. And talking to the guys, the big names here in South Africa, Mikey February, Matt Bromley's, they also all got their eyes on local. Look, we can't surf yet, but there's lots of preparation being made to make the most of being in South Africa. So I'm very excited. I haven't spoken to Geordie myself, but obviously we know he's in South Africa and he's got a couple of weeks ahead of him. But yeah, it's great to see that we're going to really be able to celebrate what we have here locally. And, if and when we can go surfing soon, hopefully we have a delayed winter, which it looks like we are. We haven't had a great big wave season in many years. I mean, imagine Dungeons just turns on, for example, in like 3 months, and we could all be out there getting the most incredible big waves, and it's just the local dudes who shine, and we can tell that story. So I'm really excited about what we can do locally and how we can then just show some of the stuff that we have here to the rest of the world, and yeah, we'll just have to push back those projects that we were going to do to next year. But yeah, it's exciting. I feel like, so the surfing, when it does happen, is going to be exciting, and for the current time, there's so many stories to be told of outside of surfing / kind of connected to the ocean. I think this is a fantastic time for us all to kind of invest in relationships with people, and truly, and also to spend quality time in those relationships, even if it's just digitally for now. It's exciting. I think we just need to be there for each other more than ever. Even if it's just a quick message to those people that you haven't spoken to, hey, how you doing? I think connecting with people this time is crucial.
Now, that's an interesting sort of subject, because when we talk about contest surfing, and I mean, obviously both of you have been very involved over the years with the Pro Junior series, with Surfing South Africa, WSL. Right now, we've sort of pre-lockdown, we had a pretty strong QS tour building in South Africa. A lot of talk over the last few years has been that the problem is not in the burgeoning pro tour in South Africa. The problem is the amateurs and the juniors, and that we don't have a strong amateur system in South Africa. Whereas we look at systems like Australia and California, where you have club surfing, and it's been a big talking point for a while now. Now, we are literally looking at a period of South African surfing where we're going to be forced, if we want to have contest surfing, to look at it. And from my side, what I've been thinking is that there's never been a better time to actually look at starting a pro-am tour in South Africa, where you would have a combination of QS and Surfing South Africa. And I know there's been foibles and there'll be people who say no from both sides, but looking at sort of old school surf contest formats that we used to have in South Africa in the 80s and 90s, where you have an entry, you don't have to pay the exorbitantly high fees that you would for a pro contest to enter, and you have prize money at the end of the day, which is one of the reasons we've fallen short with sort of SA Champs as an example, is that a lot of surfers don't want to expend the money to come to that contest just to represent their provinces. Whereas if there was prize money, a lot of surfers have told me, look, we will come to the event because there's a chance for me to at least win my money back and go on. With what's happening right now, do you think this would be a good time to sort of put something like that in play here in South Africa?
Ian, go for it.
Okay, cool. Well, it's actually interesting that this is all happening, and WSL International has actually looked at this way the QS runs and the whole CT, and this whole, I know it's still in the pipeline, but this whole thing that they're talking about is regional QS. And I think, I mean, obviously it's going to happen for a while, and it's great that this can happen, and it falls right in line with what you're saying, Kai, is where, you know, you like, there's a little pot and it's on the stove, and you put all these, and the water's cold, you put all these surfers in the pot and you put the temperature on, and suddenly everything starts bubbling, you know, and there's no one else is invited to the bride. It's like, it's just really localized, and, you know, you get this amazing like product at the end of it. And yeah, I mean, as the QS is nice, and a lot of parents I speak to say, yes, but our kids have to go against the internationals to know the level. And as important as it is, you've got to get this huge, almost rivalry going up in the junior contest, because I feel like everyone is kind of high-fiving each other, which is great. It's a nice feeling, but you need that like real drive in our youngsters. And that's where I think it's when they do travel and they see the camaraderie and the cutthroatness with Brazilians, Australians, where, you know, I'm a mate with this guy, but I'm going to kill him in the water. And our guys might have that, but I think we need to nurture it. And with this whole QS zone, so South Africa has its own QS system, I think that will develop, and I think we'll get some really good surfers out of it. And contests can run even if the lockdown continues, because we are in our own country. So who knows? But I think it's super important, and our South Africa surfers especially need it greatly with some competition rivalry.
Yeah, Kai, I'll jump in on that now as well. You know, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but when South Africa produced some of the best South African surfers of the time, with more so like the amount of them was, you know, with the Davey Weir, kind of Royd and Bryson, you know, Travis Logie, Jordy Smith, Zuma, that whole era, you know, Greg Emsley, Paul Canning. There was just so many of those guys. I mean, we had the most amount of guys in the CT we ever had with them. Ricky Basnett as well, of course. And those guys were all like, you know, surfing against each other so much. There was so much drive and rivalry, as Ian says. And, you know, that also goes back to the old, you know, heyday of the Golden Mile, where parents would drop all their kids off and they were all just ripping against each other, surfing. You know, imagine you had that. And that also comes in with the club surfing. I think, like you guys have spoken before, Dutch has said it many times. If you had that kind of talent and that consistency of surfers against each other at the weekends, you know, up at the West Coast, the Dadestia, and maybe a hot garment, like a group of them in Kommetjie, Muizenberg, you know, East London, Durban, like if you had all these hotbeds and they were spending so much more time together, these guys would push each other. And you're right, those guys weren't even necessarily needing to surf against the overseas guys. Obviously that helps, like Ian said, but when you had that many guys just trying to like outdo each other, it just pushed all of the talent and the ability. It was incredible to see.
Well, and I mean, I'm glad you talk about that generation, because obviously I had 3 of them on the show a few episodes back. And one of the things I took away from that conversation is a lot of those surfers of that generation. I look at the Redmonds, you know, the Bissett, Gary van Fleuringen, older guy, but absolutely still destroys heats and would win them. The problem is that our young surfers are not getting to surf against those guys. And those guys are hungry, competitive surfers. And they might not be doing the big airs anymore and stuff, but they can still lay down some big scores in a heat. And this is what I would like to see, is I would like to see our young up-and-coming surfers from 16 and above having to surf against guys with that kind of experience. I mean, we talk about Royd and Bryson. He's still here. He's on the South Coast. He's in the best shape he's been in years. He's ripping. Imagine having Royd and surfing in heats against these guys. He's one of the most experienced CT guys. Paul Canning, still there, still ripping, you know. And that's why I think South Africa is really positioned for something in that sort of pro-am sort of category, club category, where you bring all of those generations of solid surfers together for contests, and everyone can learn and feed off each other. At the end of the day, it's all to benefit those younger surfers who are going to go out and try and qualify for the tour. And if I look back at that generation, when I first started commentating, Alan, when you were still just starting to shoot, was that generation. There were so many contests around the country with prize money, and they weren't all QS contests. They were local South African contests where you saw everyone from 16 to 40 competing against each other in the open division. And it really did breed that competitiveness amongst the surfers.
Yeah, but I mean, I just think about in the early years, sorry, Ian, when I was, one of the events that I wanted to shoot more than ever was the Cave Rock Shootout. Do you remember? Like, it was just like a 3-day tube fest, you know. I think Ripco sponsored at the time, but man, that was a contest. Then you had the cold water events in Cape Town, where all the names were there. And you, like you said, the competitive stalwarts like Wayne Monk, you know, these guys, they still froth to surf and compete today. You're right, man. If we could get to surf with our, you know, the leaders of those generations, it would really push the level of surfing.
Yeah, I'll just jump on there. I mean, as Kai, you said that the older generation is just, you know, still right up there and happening. But it's interesting that, you know, you take SA Champs, for example, and if you look at it, a lot of, as you say, a lot of guys go, oh, it's, you know, it's not a waste of time, but, you know, there's no prize money or something like that. And all the older generation still surfs that event, or they still like love the event. And the few young guys that do come in and surf the SA Champs actually get knocked really early by this older generation. And I mean, I've shot the last few essays and you commentated, and it's the biggest like Joel. It's just the rivalry is so good. The atmosphere is great. It's fun, but not too serious. And you're right. I mean, Wayne Monk and all those guys absolutely dominate, and it's great to see. And that comes from that generation that we're talking about, where the rivalry was so intense, and the rivalry is still intense between the guys. They get upset when the score's aren't right. They moan at the judges. I mean, and they're like in their 50s and 60s, and they're still taking it that serious, which is, I mean, it's amazing to see.
Well, and I agree with you. I mean, you know, especially you talk about Monkey and, you know, like a couple of guys. And what I think there is, I mean, I'm not discounting the talent, because there's a lot of talent. But guys like Greg Emsley, Wayne Monk, you know, Gary, you know, Nicole Ruhr, and those guys. The thing is
I love Macius.
A lot of the younger surfers are maybe more competitively talented, and that they're doing the airs and the new school moves. But what they can learn from those old guys is hunger. The hunger to want to win, and doing anything in their power and a heat to win that heat. And I think a lot of the times that's where the younger guys come unstuck in the heats against these guys, is that they are actually just shocked by the absolute sort of aggression and hunger of these older guys who want to win the heat. And I mean, Alan, you've seen this as well. You've shot a couple of these events.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's crazy. As you say, it's the whole, I mean, I'm not naming any names, but I know the Groms get out of the water and they go like, did he really get an 8? And they're like scratching their heads and like, I can manage more than a 6. And I mean, they're still being dominated by like 50-year-olds, and they like, I mean, they might think they're pretty hot on the QS, and they're just getting dominated, which is great.
Well, I think it's definitely something that we're going to have to look at in the next few months, because international is not going to be an option. And if we want our guys to stay current and hungry, they're going to, first of all, have to overcome 1 or 2 months out of the water, which has been a reality for all of us, whereas the rest of the world has still been surfing. And then, of course, we're going to have to get some kind of contest scene up and running as soon as we can, because otherwise the guys are just going to lose a lot of ground. And then obviously for myself, for you guys as photographers, the videographers, the judges, no one's been earning. So we kind of do need to get the machine up and running, Alan, as fast as possible.
Totally. No, 100% agree with you. Yeah, you also bring up a good point there. It's quite hectic that, you know, the rest of the world, for the most part, are able to train and keep fit. And you look at the young guys, or whoever, any of the professional surfers, even Geordie, guys cannot actually get in the water, you know. I just look at the schedule I've kind of created for myself at home. a lot of core strength stuff. It's a lot of cardio, yes, but also coming from the old swimming training days, I was highly competitive swimmer. I've actually gotten out my old rubber elastics, tied them to the roof. They've got these paddles, you know, and they're tied to there. And so you're doing all the same kind of arm strokes, and you know, it's amazing to kind of make sure that we're trying to keep fit as much as we can for the water.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got to say, I know a lot of people joke on social media and everything else about coming out of this lockdown all fat, but I've actually lost weight. I've been making sure that I exercise every day, that I do my cardio. I've started doing HIIT training, like high intensity interval training, because I'm terrified of getting back in the water and not being able to surf. And my experience, obviously coming from a background where I was severely obese at one point, is that it's not so much losing how to surf, because you do remember how to surf. The problem is catching waves and getting up.
Yeah.
And if you are unfit, you are going to lose a lot of ground.
Yeah, and Kai, do you think that's just your cardio? I mean, the fitness element?
Yeah, for me, I think it's more cardio than strength. It's definitely, you need to be fit. But for example, I've been doing a lot of push-ups, burpees, you know, all that kind of motion exercise that is body weight, where you've got to push yourself up. Because I remember being sort of fat and unfit, and just the takeoff in surfing is actually where the problem lies. What it did for me is that I would get up too late, basically, and especially in heavier waves, I would keep getting nailed, and then you get frustrated, and it's just you start moving backwards really fast with frustration. So I find that if you're stronger in the shoulders and you're catching waves, and something I say to a lot of people when they ask for advice on surfing is like, if you're catching waves, you're surfing. If you're not catching waves, you're not surfing. And then that frustration builds, and it just gets worse and worse. And it becomes like a self-perpetuating problem, where eventually you just lose the chance to go surfing altogether.
Totally, Ren. I'm so glad you really painted a clear picture there. I'm actually going to take some things from that. Thank you. And I think as surf photographers, one of the things I found, even when I was able to be out and about before this whole COVID-19 lockdown happened, I would get to winter sometimes and go swim, you know, in Namibia, Skeleton Bay for 2 days in a row, or go swim at, you know, sunsets, or swim at Bayview. And I could only last 2-3 hours. And I was thinking, you know, I'm a pretty fit guy. Like, why is this happening? I get these severe leg cramps. And I thought maybe it's the salts, my sodiums, or whatever levels. Maybe it was not hydrating well. And I attended to both of those things, and I still was getting cramps. And speaking to all the personal trainers like Neil Zietzman and, you know, these different guys that specialize, they just said, listen, I hate to point it out to you, but I think it's just like the strength, you know, like you just need to really, it's kind of like you're doing a marathon, you know, so you really need to get these muscles going. So you're right. I've also focused, I think the push-up thing is a burpees really crucial for surfing. But as a person who needs to rely on their legs a lot, I've really been working on the thighs, the inner thighs, all that stuff a lot. I've got a set of stairs here up to my house, and I've been using those a lot. So yeah, it's cool to be able to pinpoint and really pick out how we can keep ourselves fit during this time.
Yeah, and I mean, you're also a swimmer. You're in the water, often with a camera. It's a different kind of fitness, actually, because I mean, I've tried to swim, obviously, as a videographer, and I don't think many people actually understand the kind of effort you have to put in to stay in the zone, especially in sort of heavier waves with a camera housing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a totally different situation. A lot of guys go, oh, but you can just, you know, swim under. What they don't realize is like, you have nothing to float on. A lot of surfers, you know, like, oh, that was heavy, and they grab their board and they're like, can rest. Surf photographers, and when they swim, there's nothing to rest on. So I mean, if you swim out at a big day somewhere, by the fourth full wave on your head, the turbulence underwater is serious. It's not only just going under. These huge like currents that swirl on the bottom of the sea, and they just like grab your flippers, and they just pull you down. And there's constant sideways movements that you're doing with your fins, you know, like if you tread water, that type of thing. There's a lot that goes into swimming, and a lot of people think it's upper strength, like your shoulders, but it's, as Alan says, it's your legs. And I've actually been working, I surf and shoot a lot, both, but I do know that my my inner thighs and my outer knee, right and left, need work. So actually in this time I've been doing, every second day I've been doing a lot of like medicine ball stuff. So I've been throwing up, catching, squatting, weights in each arm, you know, big deep squats, something I actually because you know when you out and about, you go, oh, I've got to work on it, but then instead you just go for a surf, and you know, you start training your muscles to actually not recover, or you're not working the part that you need to work. And now with this whole lockdown, I can actually focus and actually work on the bit that I need to. But yeah, swimming is not as easy as everyone thinks, I think.
Well, and I like that we on this conversation, because we spoke about social media earlier, and obviously the advent of Instagram and everyone being an expert and content creator, and it's something that I think people who work in the industry of content, so coming from myself, coming from a television and video production background, you guys as professional photographers, the advent of social media has been an interesting one, especially in a sport like surfing, where, you know, people are getting GoPros and getting their own footage. But for me, I can look at a wall of photography for surfing, and I think with quite a lot of ease, I'm going to be able to take my finger and point at every photograph that has been done by an actual photographer, because there is a skill set involved. There is not just from framing and from getting the right shot, but also when you're taking photos as a professional, you're not just thinking of the moment, you're thinking of the post moment. You're thinking of post-production before you shoot, as opposed to, I think the amateur is shooting and then looking at post-production. Alan?
Yeah, I'll go for it, Alan.
Yeah, no, Kai, you're 100% there. I think coming from heavily a print media publication kind of background, I often shoot thinking about how that's going to be used, you know, in print. Sometimes, you know, you want to have a lot of space on the left or right of the frame, maybe above the frame, so that comes into play. I feel like probably the number one thing that I do when I'm going to be entering any kind of lineup or anything is actually like how I'm going to best tell the story here. You know, it's all very well, like you said, a lot of us, I fall into this pit myself, just shooting, you know, you're just shooting and I'm capturing, like, well, I'll worry about it later. But I think if you can take a step back for a second and really just think about how you're going to best tell the story, especially if you're going to be doing a profile piece on someone, or, you know, you document in a way for the first time, you know, really want to show your viewers for the after, the post, like you said, really how this is going to play out. And, you know, yeah, obviously lighting and all that stuff comes into play as a photographer, but I think for me, that's why film was so beautiful in the old days, because before you got into a lineup, you would have to sit back and really look at your field of what you were going to be doing. And are there clouds coming over? Okay, cool. That's going to affect my lighting. Okay, I won't be able to change my settings, you know, in the old days. Or, man, this film, should I shoot 400 because it's grainier? It's going to give me a bit more light in the darkness. There was so much you wanted to think about before you even got a shot. So I feel like that really gave me a good bit of perspective on shooting, thinking things through beforehand. But I like what you said. It really is. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who's not a photographer, and they were just saying he's very excited to see how this coronavirus globally is going to affect things in the surf media world. And I think in photography in general, how I think those professionals are going to kind of come through again. You know, guys that have been there, they're the stalwarts, they've been working hard, and then after this lockdown, they're still there and they're producing good content. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Ian?
Well, yeah, I mean, this similar thing. One thing that, I mean, it's a bit of a side thing, but Alan was talking about telling a story. And as much as an image tells a story, I always think the difference between video and photography is that video tells you a story. So video is actually like, you know, the story plays out. And where photography almost, if, as Alan said, if you're working on a profile piece, the image goes hand in hand with the text that you write or something like that. But if you just had to put a photo up, it lets the viewer imagine himself there or imagine the situation, and it lets the subconscious and the imagination run wild, which is what I like about photography. Whereas video kind of like plays out and tells you a story. And that's the main thing I like about photography. Yeah.
Now, we talk about print media, sort of, it's funny how just automatically these days it gets talked about in almost the past tense. This week in sort of big mainstream publication, we've seen Claxton's, Cosmopolitan, some of the hugest print media sort of brands and companies in South Africa closing their doors. I think the writing was on the wall already, but obviously Corona just absolutely shutting them down with the pulling of budgets from marketers. How important right now is it that people actually support Zigzag? And I mean, I'd like to push that this is not a paid for punt. It's just that we are so lucky in South Africa to have such a strong surf magazine. And right now, like, I feel like surfers really need to support Zigzag, because I think the writing's kind of on the wall there too. Surf brands were in sort of deep doo-doo before this. Can you imagine what's going on right now behind the scenes?
Alan, go for it.
Yeah, Kai, I think you're right, man. I think for me personally, we spoke earlier about how we're going to be looking at South Africa and looking at local, just for things like travel, for things like, you know, surf media, for things like the surf season, the competitive season. You said we're just going to be more and more focusing on things like that are local and locals lacquer. And I think the same goes for how we shop and buy our food. I think it's also, like you said, now with media, I think we really do need to support local, because not only is it cool to do so, but it really does benefit our economy and who we all are. And look, Zigzag has always had a very unique voice. It's the South African surf voice, but it's also at the moment the African one. And man, we've got such an incredible uniqueness about where we are geographically in the world. And there's so many great stories to be told and shared. So yeah, I'm really hoping that we can facilitate that Ian and I and others can facilitate that and continue to tell good stories about South Africans, especially through this whole Corona time and afterwards, just the resilience of us as a nation and our diversity as a nation. It's really exciting. I think there's just so much content to tell and to share. I really can't wait to get out there and do it. I think the key thing at the moment for publications like Zigzag is literally just the advertising. You know, to print a magazine costs a lot of money. There's certainly no shortage of content. I know for a fact that there's more than enough content to publish, 12 issues a year. It really just comes down to, can we afford to do that? I say we just collectively, because I feel so invested in the magazine. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if brands will, take those bold steps to advertise in a place like Zigzag, or are they going to withhold that for some time? It's a very uncertain time. I know a lot of people would be scared to put money out and advertise, but I still feel like there's a lot of people that are that can make money from this, and they will want to as soon as things open up. So it's going to be interesting.
And I mean, yeah, on the same vein as what Alan just said, I think the demand on people, or the wish and the will for people to sap up social media, print images, magazines, go to the store and buy a pair of boardies is going to be the highest it's been in, ever that we've seen. I mean, people have been starved of maybe not content, because content is social media now, but just tangible things. Everyone's lost in their phone at the moment, and I think when the floodgates open, everyone's going to run to the store and just the new pair of board shorts or something like that. And I think as advertising goes, this is a super important time for surf brands and brands alike to quickly rise to the top and go, look, we're advertising, this is what we do. And it's a super important time for them to actually show their worth and put out. And but I don't think it's only surf brands. I think this time in the world and the country, it's going to be really good for some really local core brands, smaller brands, to come up and suddenly challenge that hierarchy of the top 3 or the top 4 brands in the world. And suddenly I think we're going to see a shift where the bigger brands have kind of been flattened down by this whole thing, and then these local brands are just going to pop up, and I think that's going to feed each other, and it's going to be a good rivalry.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So from our discussion today is literally looking at local content, and supporting local is going to be the big push for us here in South Africa, especially as a surf community. And it's also why I think, outside of the argument for let us surf and when and all the stuff I'm seeing on Facebook and everywhere else from surfers, my feeling is like what the kids in J-Bay have done, what Frank Solomon, what Greg Burdish, Nigel and the 9 Miles, is channel your energy into something positive and meaningful that shows the rest of South Africa that surfers are an integral part of their local communities, and just how, Ubuntu, the surfing community, can be. For myself and Dachi with Amandla, we couldn't start Amandla now because there's no tour, which is why the new foundation was set up to help guys like Jose and Tando and all of them. So we're looking at launching a campaign in the next week to raise funds for face masks, to get face masks out to all of those surf community feeding programs. And we've put a lot of focus on Let's Feed J-Bay and the great work they're doing, but I think surfers also need to go and support, the Sentinel, 9 Miles, Pop Surf, the Little Optimist up on the West Coast supporting the Elands Bay and Lamberts Bay communities. These are the kind of programs surfers really need to push that energy into right now. And I feel like the karma of that will come back to benefit surfing, whereas sort of sitting on the fence and shouting in anger is not really going to help the situation.
Totally.
No, you're right, Kai. I think, the word of the lockdown has been solidarity. And I think for me personally, I feel like, when you have to ask yourself those big questions, how does surfing or going surfing right now help or not help others? And for me personally, I feel like if I can stand in solidarity with people like Nigel, Frank, Greg, all the people up in J-Bay, these incredible foundations that are doing such good, not only for their local communities that don't surf, but the local communities with kids and people that do surf, if we can stand together with them through this time, because they can't surf either. And just to really kind of help them through this difficult time, so that when we do go back surfing sometime soon, yes, we're going to be so tight and so close. We're going to have such a great respect for each other, and we're really going to be showing that togetherness that we really wish and hope for South Africa.
And obviously we are all holding thumbs that level 3 comes soon and that we can go back to the water in level 3.
Yeah, seriously hoping.
So we're going to finish off the show, boys. Thanks so much for being on. I think we could have probably talked for hours more. The three of us do love a good chat. But I think we've covered some really good points there, and a kind of couple of different angles than what I've spoken with the athletes about. Any last pieces of advice for the lockdown for the people out there? Ian?
Alan, you go first, bro.
Yeah, Kai, and to all the people that are listening out there in the media world, I think for me, advice-wise, is take one day at a time. Don't look too far down the road, because there's so much speculation and conjecture about what's coming and what's not coming. I feel like just focus on the days ahead of you, what you can do today. Most importantly, what you can do today for others. I think just keep in touch with people, like I said earlier, just seeing how they are doing, help each other through these difficult times. Myself, I had a down week, I said a few weeks back, and just to get through that, and we just need to be there for each other. So yeah, just focus on each day, and tomorrow's another day. And
to pretty much exactly what Alan said. Basically, I think at the moment, looking at yourself is super important. Just checking your moods. Being locked up for a long time can definitely have an effect on the way you give out as a person. And I think just talk about feelings, because I think a lot of people are going to be struggling at the moment. No cigarettes, no alcohol, things like that. And I think just stay safe in your mind as much as your lungs, and you're wearing a mask. And talk about any bad feelings you might be having, because I think it's a lot of people are taking this quite heavily internally that they might not be showing.
Yeah, well, I have to agree with the boys. You need to talk, you need to share the love. And if you are feeling down, remember there are numbers, there are people out there, your friends and family that are willing to help. And, don't be scared to talk to people. It's a big one. So I certainly push that message as well. Boys, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been great seeing your faces and having a little chat again. And hopefully we can meet up somewhere on the coastline again soon and make some great content and share a braai and a couple of cold ones.
Yes, Kai. Shot Kai, legend, bro.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks so much for being on the show. So, guys, remember, it's the lockdown, and we'll keep bringing the podcasts, keeping surfing alive during lockdown. Thanks so much.